My family has always been very outdoor activity focused. We grew up rather poor, and the outside world was free. We'd often spend the whole day out tracking the woodland or up a mountain to look at caves. From this we developed a love of camping, and because it was less costly than going abroad or staying in a hotel, a lot of my holiday memories are camping ones. Sometimes, if we were at a proper camping ground, and it was getting dark, my brother and I would be given little torches and told to run up and down the paths, counting as many rabbits or squirrels as we could see. I realized my mother was just doing this to tire us out, but it was actually pretty fun at the time. The only thing that made it odd at times was the sense of being watched. I know that this is something that can often seem creepy or malevolent, but I never got a hint of fear. It was almost comforting, to be honest. With a wild imagination, fueled by massive consumption of Tolkien and Pratchett, I like to pretend that it was nice fae folk or the like, watching the humans in their woods or landsec. One particular memory I have is of thinking I saw movement in the tree line, and shining the torch towards it in the hopes of it being a magical creature or a friend. Only there was nothing there. When I moved the light away, there was no movement or shape there, when I was looking directly at that spot. The movement was out of the corner of my eye. Just a shadow or shape moving quickly about. After going back to the tent, my family all settled down to sleep. My mother in one room, and my brother and I sharing the other. I have always hated how quickly they both seem to be able to fall asleep. Even now it feels like I toss and turn for hours. That night was no different. I lay there trying to force myself into a dream when I hear something outside the tent. At first I think, it's probably one of the rabbits my brother and I chased around earlier, finally free of our mayhem, and I let out a soft huff of a laugh so as to not wake my sibling. The sound stops. It was like something sweeping across the grass, like a blanket or sheet. Not footsteps. Certainly not a rabbit. I go still, and hold my breath to try and listen as best I could. There was nothing. I start to relax and go to get more comfortable, when the side of the tent near my head moves. Like someone had blown on it from the outside, or had exhaled hard onto it. I freeze. I know that moving around can cause the tent to move with you, but I'd only shifted my head slightly on my pillow so I could start to turn over. Everything is still totally silent. But I know there is something outside the tent. It's as silent as I am, it's listening too. I could not tell you how long I lay there, not daring to move, to breath loudly, to look away from the thin material of the tent where something is listening to me, just inches away. I fell asleep at some point, because it felt like suddenly it was morning. I look around the outside of the tent, but there's no sign of anything having been sitting next to me all night in the grass. It's a couple more years before we go camping again, and I've totally forgotten about this one night. I'm in my early teens then, and have my own little tent just outside the one my mother and brother are in. Because I was right up in that angsty phase where I couldn't stand sharing a room with my brother, etc. We've been listening to music on my CD player, and then turned it off and went to bed. I curl up, and read for a little while by the light of my torch, then when I feel sleepy enough, put it aside and turned off the torch. I'm all snuggled up, wiggling my feet slightly to warm them up in the sleeping bag, when I get the feeling of someone or something being close to me. You know how sometimes you just know someone else is in the room with you, even if you haven't seen or heard them yet, but you just know. That was it. I froze and listened to see if I could hear an animal or person walking about, but heard nothing. The opening of my tent moves, like as if in a slight breeze, only there's no corresponding sound from the trees right above the tents, nothing. The memory of the first time this happened suddenly comes back to me, and for some reason, instead of being scared, I'm angry. I move as quickly as I can, practically ripping open my tent and turning on my torch, searching for whatever it was. There was nothing there. I go to move back into my tent, and I get this trill of absolute terror down my spine. I have no idea what's causing it, but every fiber of my being is screaming at me to not turn my back on. Whatever. I keep the torch on, pointed in front of me, and reach back blindly to grab my sleeping bag and bag with my clothes in it. I stay frozen in place, too terrified to move for probably only a few minutes, but it felt like hours. I finally pluck up the courage to make a frenzied dash to my mother's tent, and scramble inside. I curl up on the floor next to my brother, and hardly sleep the whole night. The following morning, everything seems totally fine. Except the tent pegs for the guy lines are missing. My mother figures that it must have been some of the shitty kids from a few tents over, and dismisses it as she has spares in the car. My bookmark is also missing. I left my book in my tent in my mad dash, and the bookmark is nowhere to be seen, inside or outside of the tent, and I've lost my place. Maybe it got flung far off when I took off, and the wind took it further afield after that. But I just know, that it's my fault. I shouldn't have tried to confront it, shouldn't have shone the light at it. When it's listening, it's doing nothing wrong. It just likes to hear what's going on, I guess, but it does not want to be seen. I pissed something off that night and I know it. My mother and brother don't notice anything, and I start to think I'm just paranoid or delusional. During the day, every now and then, I would get the feeling of being watched, and it wasn't nice at all. I kept looking over my shoulders, trying to see who was looking at me. I'm getting really freaked out at this point. I decide that if I have offended something, I should at least apologize. So I grab a large chocolate bar and a post-it note. I write "I'm sorry" on the note, stick it to the chocolate and chuck it as far into the trees as I can, in the general direction of where the feeling of being watched is coming from. We go home the next day. The missing tent pegs are found in the side pocket of the passenger seat in the car. My bookmark is in the bottom of my bag under my dirty washing and shower stuff that I had not moved. I've never found out what it was, I can only call it the listener, because that's what it does. That's all it does, unless pissed off, I guess. Occasionally when I'm out and about in the woods, either by myself or with family, I get the feeling that we're not alone, but I ignore it now, no matter how uncomfortable it makes me. If it can get inside the locked car to put back the tent pegs, it can get into my house. I am not making anything else in the woods angry. Just leave it alone and you'll be okay.